I say what I do, and I think what this office does, this Office of Force Transformation, needs to do, is think about the future of warfare within the context of everything else. And I think the everything else becomes more and more important as we understand this global war on terrorism within the larger context of the spreading of globalization. So here we go. I'm going to give you my quick history of the 20th century. I'm going to talk about Globalization 1. I'm going to date it from 1870. I'll take it up to 1929 to keep it simple. First great coming together of the global economy. I'll say somewhat facetiously, we screw the pooch one afternoon on Wall Street. We create a systemic stress we later call the Great Depression. From that, as an economic determinist, I'll argue we get World War II. Because it wasn't just Nazi shenanigans. It wasn't just the harshness of Versailles. It was the economy, stupid, that destroyed this beautifully designed Weimar Republic. People in my field, political science, will tell you that it began in its modern form with the question, why did the Weimar Republic fail? At the end of the Second World War, America decides we're going to firewall ourselves off from this horrible experience. Not just the Holocaust, never again, but the economic nationalism of the 1930s, which killed this first great coming together of the global economy, sent all those indices of integration quite literally back to zero. We institute what we like to call a new rule set. Resource flows, strategic alliances, the biggest reorganization of the U.S. government up until that point in history, the international organizations we create. So I'm talking Defense Act, 1947, creation of DOD, Department of Defense, Central Intelligence Agency, creation of the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the United Nations, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the Marshall Plan, the Strategy of Containment, a massive new collection of rules. It took us about a decade to figure out. Ostensibly, this package was put together to contain the Soviet threat. Sub rosa, the real goal, was to recreate globalization, quite explicitly on three key pillars: North America, Japan, Western Europe. Now, if you listen to the World Bank around 1980, you begin to see the so-called new globalizers. We call them emerging markets after the 87 crash, because all that boomer money's looking for a higher outcome. These emerging markets, these 24 new globalizers, doesn't sound like a lot in a world population of almost 200 states, except it's half the world's population. And a new era of globalization is born. So Deng really turns history, really pivots it in China. Now the Berlin Wall comes down. Seemingly everybody on the same rule set page, end of history. Maybe a clash of civilizations. And we see a spiking of ethnic conflict in the collapse of the Soviet Empire. But seemingly everybody on the same rule set page as we proceed into the 90s, massive expansion of the global economy. The question we began asking, do we encounter new stresses across the 90s that call into question what was the new rule set for the late 1940s, early 1950s, now starts to look a little long in the tooth, because that rule set was put together to prevent the collapse of Globalization 1, not necessarily to further the advance of Globalization 2, which I will argue is quantitatively different. In Globalization 1, for example, labor much more fluid across borders, money not nearly as much as it is today, and no global integrated production. First big hint for me, Mexican pesos crisis, 1994. Seemed like a lot more than just financial panic. Other examples, rapid climate change, computer viruses with global impact, the rise of catastrophic terrorism. So this rule set put together to prevent this sort of great power war. Clearest example, permanent members, veto-wielding members, UN Security Council, the winning coalition from World War II. Why? We were concerned they might go back to war with one another. We had been through 2 world wars at that point, killed tens of millions. Not exactly the problem set we face today. So what we were interested in thinking about when we first drew this slide back with the Y2K work in the summer of 1998 was to ask what could be a catalytic event coming down the pike that would crystallize a sense of rule sets out of control. Were we talking the same level of destruction as World War II? No. But the same level of disruption on some points. Meaning lots of new rules would come in its aftermath. Tremendous rules. Now we were interested in Y2K, and we were interested in the tech crash, because we could see the new rules coming in the financial sector. But if you talk to people on Wall Street, they'll tell you there's a financial panic roughly every 13, 14 years in the United States, a crash. Why? Because you get far enough away from the last crash, pretty soon you only have stockbrokers, which is a young person's game, who can't remember what that last crash looked like. And the further they get from that last crash, they start talking about new rules, new ways of doing things, new realities, which we typically discover after the crash involve lying, cheating, stealing.